and we're going to expand on the concept of emotionally intelligent communication. Um, we looked at before that we are created for connection. Oh, yeah, created for connection, and the heart of connection is communication. When I asked a question about one of the factors that cause marital breakdown, Gottman had something interesting to say about that. He said that couples in bad marriages tend to communicate very well. They just don't communicate they communicate negativity very well. They don't communicate in a healthy way. Um, but they are usually pretty good about communicating what is on their hearts, even though that's not healthy for the relationship. Um, but what is communication? The interchange of thoughts, information, or opinions by speech, writing, signs, or symbols. Amos 3 and verse 3. Can two walk together except they be agreed? And the implied answer is no, they can't. So when it comes to communication, we know that words have power. Genesis 11 and verse 6 says, the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible. So there is power in language. Solomon says that death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Words have a power you can build people up and you can tear people down with words. I was sharing yesterday, we were talking about how words can be triggering. And it reminded me of a testimony given by one of our pastors who said that when he was in his teenage years, he was a real tearaway. And his mother said to him when he was 16, I wish you were never born. And as he gave the testimony, there in his 40s, his eyes were just flowing down with tears, remembering those words which his mother spoke. Words are powerful, and we need to be careful how we use them, especially in the context of our closest relationships. So the importance of communication, Virginia Satir in her book People Making says, once a human being has arrived on Earth, communication is the largest single factor determining what kinds of relationships he makes with others and what happens to him in the world about him. Nolan Fitzpatrick says this, intimate relationships develop through a process in which partners disclose aspects of themselves to one another, feel understood, validated, and cared for, and are thus encouraged by those experiences to continue to disclose in the future. This is a kind of encapsulates what we mean by creating the safe space in our relationships. That is the space where we are confident that whatever we share with the other person, that other person is going to treat it with love and care and treat it as precious, as confidential, and they're going to respond to us in an appropriate way. So we know that there are different levels of communication. There's the chit chat, where we're just passing the time of day. Can get a little deeper when we start reporting the news. You know, we have conversations around things like politics and what's going on in the news. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer and Biden and Trump and all that good stuff. Then there is the level of communicating ideas. You know, what do we think about these things? we're revealing more about ourselves, what our thinking is, what our worldview is. And then it gets to the level of sharing our feelings. The more we trust the person with whom we are speaking, the more willing we are to share our feelings. And then self-disclosure. And these different levels of communication are, it's not that one is better than the other, it's what's appropriate in the circumstance. So there are circumstances where the chit-chat level, that's the appropriate level. Go no further than that. If you're with people with whom you don't feel safe, you're not going to be sharing deeply, not going to be sharing your feelings and engaging in self-disclosure. There are different levels of communication and the different levels of our relationship. And if we take Jesus as an example, Jesus had a close relationship with the disciples, obviously. But even within the disciples, he was closer to Peter, James, and John than he was with the other 9. He was closer to John than he was with the others. He was closer to the disciples than he was to the women who ministered to him. He was closer to the women who ministered to him than he was to the scribes and the Pharisees. But at each level, he was authentic in his communication. But the depth of communication was different at the different levels, and that's wholly appropriate. So the level of communication will be dependent on the depth of the relationship and the circumstances. Intimacy is integral in the deepest relationships that we have. And in her book, Harriet Lerner says in the dance of intimacy, an intimate relationship is one in which neither party silences, sacrifices, or betrays the self, and each party expresses strength and vulnerability, weakness and competence in a balanced way. Palmer Parker, who is a Quaker and an activist, a political activist, says this in his book, A Hidden Wholeness. If you are here unfaithfully with us, you are causing great damage, terrible damage. And I think that it's again, this is another book that I'd highly recommend, A Hidden Wholeness. And what he is saying is that who we are on the inside will come out on the outside. And that there is only so much pretense that we can do. And that if we're not really sincere in our relationship, that's going to have an impact. If we're not really committed to loving and expressing agape love towards the person that we are with, we're going to cause great damage. Because who you are on the inside, if you are a hypocrite, if you are you're not a person of integrity, who you are on the inside is going to come out on the outside. So intimacy involves mutual understanding, deepening commitment, and personal sharing. And all of those feed into each other. Galatians 4 and verse 6. But now after you have known God, or rather are known by God, how is it then that you turn again to the weak and beggarly elements to which you desire again to be in bondage? So this concept of being known, knowing and being known, is so integral to healthy relationships and healthy spirituality. In 1 Corinthians 8 and verse 3, but if anyone loves God, this one is known by God. And what this knowing, being known by God is referring to is not just the fact that God knows us, because he knows everybody. But Paul is saying here, if anyone loves God, the one who loves God is the one who is known by God. And the knowing by God is an experience that we have as a result of being in contact with Him. It is the experience of being affirmed, being forgiven, knowing that we are truly loved by Him. And this, again, is the type of experience that we can have with other people, whether it's in the context of a marriage, whether it's in the context of family, whether it's in the context of deep friendships, the David and the Jonathan type relationship. It is that knowing in a relationship that we, the deepest level of heart sharing with another person. But there are numerous barriers to effective communication. They can come in all types of forms, and it's important to appreciate what gets in the way of healthy relationship. Brene Brown, who wrote the classic book Daring Greatly, which is essentially a study of shame and vulnerability. And she started off her research trying to identify what makes a healthy relationship. And she ended up focusing the bulk of her attention on the things that get in the way of healthy relationships. So it's important for us that if we are not enjoying the kind of relationships that we have spoken about, the open, deep, intimate, safe relationships, what is it? What is the barrier that is getting in the way of that? Because that's where the work needs to be done to bring those barriers down, if it is appropriate and if it is safe to do so. John Powell wrote this book called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? John Powell was a psychologist, and he did a survey. He posed the question, and he was particularly struck by one of the responses that he got to the question. And the response was, if I tell you who I am, you may not like who I am, and that's all I have. And that response just shouts, insecurity and fear. And it is symptomatic of many relationships that we have, even in the church, that we don't feel safe, that we feel that if we reveal who we really are, then people will see us in such a negative light that they won't want to have anything to do with us. And the result of that is that we can create masks that we wear, along with our Sabbath suits and our Sabbath dresses. We can put on a mask, so that when we walk through the church doors, we're presenting ourselves in a way that we hope will make us acceptable to other people, rather than feeling relaxed and safe enough just to be ourselves. We don't always have to be smiling and happy when we're just not. So the challenge is for us in church is to create that environment where people can feel safe to be themselves. And again, that's going to depend on the level of relationship that you have with certain individuals. But church should be an authentic environment where we can feel able to share what's going on in our lives without fear of judgment. We have this incident in 1 Kings 14 where the wife of Jeroboam goes to see the prophet to find out what's going to happen to the their son who is sick. And it's a bit of a comical situation where the wife of Jeroboam goes to the prophet, and she disguises herself because she's going into an unsafe situation in enemy territory to consult a prophet. And then the comical situation is that she disguises herself. The prophet is half blind. And when she gets to the door of his house, he says to her, "Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam." And then he asks her this question: "Why do you pretend to be another person?" And that's a question that's applicable for us too. When we are in church or in wherever it is, whether we're at work or what have you, why do we pretend? What is it that leads us to act in a way that is not necessarily authentic to who we are? Some of those reasons may be legitimate, but some of those may reveal areas of our lives that we need to address. So one of the important characteristics which needs to be exhibited in healthy communication is assertiveness. And assertiveness is the quality of being willing to state one's views, feelings, needs, and convictions firmly and fairly, but with consideration and respect for the other person's views, feelings, needs, and convictions. The contrast in terms of different types of communication are between passive, aggressive, and assertive. With passive communication, we allow other people to have power over us. We don't state what we need to state, and as a result, people have power over us. With the aggressive form of communication, the tables are turned. We may have power over other individuals, state whatever we want, but we don't necessarily take into account other people's feelings when we act in that aggressive way. I guess there's a fourth type that we could add to that, and that is the passive aggressive. The passive aggressive person is the one who is not overtly aggressive, but they're not particularly honest in their emotional communication, because they're presenting themselves in one way, but they're stating it in a way that is negative. It sends a kind of underhanded message to the other person. But the ideal form of communication is assertive communication. This is what we need to be striving for. One of the problems, going back to what in marriage, is that couples are not as assertive with each other as they should be. Robert Olson, who is who founded Prepare Enrich in his book The Couple Checkup, identifies different levels of communication. So you've got two people, person A, person B. Type of communication. So if you have two individuals who are passive, the relationship tends to be devitalized because neither of them are really expressing what they need to express within a relationship in order to feel fulfilled, in order to feel heard, in order to feel validated, in order to communicate changes that need to happen in order for the relationship to grow. Who wins? Well, they both lose. And the level of intimacy is low. Where you have one individual who is passive and another individual who is aggressive, what you have there is a relationship of dominance. And when you carry that to its extreme, it becomes a relationship that can be abusive. And in that situation, you have a win-lose situation. And again, the intimacy is going to be low because the passive individual is not going to feel free to bare their heart and soul to somebody who is dominating them in that way. And the aggressive person generally doesn't feel the need to have that level of communication. Where you have two individuals who are aggressive, that's a recipe for disaster too. You have a relationship that is conflicted, both lose, and in its extreme, you've got World War III going on in that relationship, and obviously intimacy is going to be low. Where you have an individual who is assertive and one who is passive, that is a recipe for frustration for the person who is assertive. Because what they want from the other individual is, talk to me. Tell me what's going on for you. They want an open relationship, but the passive person, they don't give. The passive person may be a stonewaller. They put the walls up. They're not sharing, and that can be very frustrating for the assertive person. And again, both lose. Intimacy level low. Where you have an assertive individual and an aggressive individual, you've got confrontation. The assertive person is doing their best to stand their ground. They're trying to be as respectful as possible. The aggressive person is stepping over the line. They're violating boundaries. And it's a confrontational situation because the assertive person does not compromise their values in order to fit in with the needs of the aggressive person. And again, both lose. The ideal that we're looking for is the two assertive individuals. And this is something that we grow into. And the relationship becomes growing, it becomes vital. Couples are willing to be courageous in sharing their hearts, and they reap the rewards in a growing relationship. Both win, and the level of intimacy is high. So this is what we're trying to encourage, whether it be marriage, whatever the type of communication is, whatever the type of relationship it is, we're trying to encourage assertiveness in communication. And this is Paul's words in Ephesians 4, verse 15. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into him who is the head. So speaking the truth in love means that sometimes we have to say difficult things. We are living in a culture now where it seems like one of the highest values is you have to be kind. And if you say anything that goes against people's value system, then that's not kind, and that's, we should always avoid that. Well, no, actually, sometimes we need to speak the truth. When Jesus said to Peter, "Get thee behind me," that may appear from the outside not to be kind, but it was important for Jesus to let Peter know that he was allowing the enemy to adversely impact him. So speaking the truth requires courage, but it's important that it is done within a healthy context. So 6 possible messages in communication. And this is from the book Communication by H. Norman Wright. And this is what creates a challenge for us. So there is the potential for so much misunderstanding. Why? Because there's what you want to say. There's what you actually say. There's what the person hears. There's what the person thinks they heard. And then there's what the person says about what you said. So there's what you think the person said about what you said. So there's so much potential for misunderstanding, and there may be different nuances and different levels even within beyond the 6. So what is vital for effective communication is that there be constant feedback. What is feedback? It's simply a response to or a clarification of the message that you perceive that you have received. when you said such and such, did you mean? Or when you said this, were you trying to accomplish this? Or you're just asking for clarification so that you can understand what exactly is being communicated. One of the dangers is that we assume. We'll come back to that in a short while. Learning styles impact our ability to communicate effectively. The way that we best receive information. So for some people, they are very verbal. They prefer words in speech and writing. And that helps them to understand more effectively. For other people, it's about visual. And visual is not just about what they can actually see with their eyes, but also what they can see with their imagination. So one of the ways that we can communicate effectively is to create what Gary Smalley calls word pictures. If we say something like, when you said that to me, it was like taking a hammer and smashing a peach. It creates a word picture that can communicate to the individual the depth of what you are saying. Some people are auditory, musical. They prefer sounds. Some are kinesthetic. They're hands-on. Some taste. For some, they're solitary. They work better by themselves. Social. Some people are more social. In terms of understanding and learning information. Some are their learning style is logical, mathematical. All of these need to be taken into account when we are communicating with people. If we want to get our message across, we need to think about the best way to communicate the message. Gottman, in his book, A Couple's Guide to Communication, says good communication means having the impact you intended to have. That is, intent equals impact. Matthew 5:37, but let your yes be yes and your no, no. So be clear. So in intent and impact, when the speaker has something to say, they have an intention that underlies that speech. But what they say passes through a filter. The message goes through a filter, the filter of the speaker, but also has to travel through the filter of the listener. And hence, this is what gives rise to the potential misunderstanding. So the speaker says something that has an impact on the listener. And it's interesting here, I meant to search for the reference, but I forgot to do so. Ellen White makes a comment where she says, sometimes when people are communicating, the speaker says what they say, and the enemy takes what they've said, twists it so that it is heard in a negative way by the listener. Again, this is part of the spiritual battle in which we are in. So it is vitally important that we engage in this feedback process where we can clarify the messages that we are communicating. Only when you know the impact that the message actually had and compare it to your intent can you find out where miscommunication occurred. So we need to be open with each other. The problem is sometimes is that when somebody says something and it has an impact, we react to the impact in a way that stifles effective communication rather than enhances it. So the speaker seeks to clarify the intent of the message by stating exactly what he or she is thinking, wanting, or feeling. In healthy communication, both parties try to make sure that the intent of the message is understood and they do not fill in gaps with guesses as to what is going on in the speaker's mind. None of us have the ability to read people's minds, and it is dangerous to make assumptions. Henry Winkler said, assumptions are the termites of relationships. And assuming that impact equals intent can lead to confusion, hurt feelings, and other communication pitfalls. One of the words that has come into our vocabulary in the last 10 years or so, or last 5 years, I would say, is microaggressions. Microaggressions are verbal or behavioral slights, or intentional or unintentional, that are perceived as being harm, or are received as being harmful to the individual, or discriminatory or insulting. And the thing about microaggressions is that, and I don't like the term myself, because an aggression, it implies intentionality. But the idea behind it is that even if you don't intend to harm, then you can do so, because what is received, the impact that it has, determines whether or not it is a microaggression. And the problem with that is that the microaggression becomes subjective. The person who decides whether or not it is a microaggression is the person who is receiving, while the person who has said what they've said might not have intended to say anything that is harmful to the other individual. So while the concept of microaggression is real, you know, we can say things that are harmful even when we don't intend. We can say things that are discriminatory or put people down without really thinking about it. The biggest danger with microaggressions for me, or the biggest problem, is that they encourage a mindset where we're looking for the worst in the other person. We're assuming bad intentions. Whereas in healthy relationships, it is better to make generous assumptions about the other person's motives. Because even when you're wrong, even when they may intend something that is negative, if we assume generous intentions or assumptions, that's beneficial for us. It's not healthy to go through life looking for the worst in other people all the time. So microaggressions is an example of where we can make assumptions about people's intentions that are not necessarily the case. So we need to be careful with that. Stephen Covey says this in Primary Greatness: I think the deepest hunger of the human soul is to be recognized, valued, appreciated, and understood. When you acknowledge others and adapt yourself in an effort to reach them, in effect, you say to them, you matter, you are a person of worth. And that's a concept embraced under one of Covey's 7 habits, which is seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's when we do it the other way around that becomes problematic, because it's more about me and what I think and what I feel and what I want. But if we are intentional about seeking to understand the other person, we might not necessarily agree with them. But if we understand their story, it helps to improve the relationship that we have with them. One of the most loving things that we can do for someone is to listen to them so that they feel truly heard. It was not really not until I started doing counseling training did I really appreciate how difficult listening is, and how much effort listening can entail. You know, if you spend time with somebody, and not necessarily in a counseling situation, but if you spend time listening to somebody share from their hearts, you can feel exhausted afterwards, because it takes a lot of brain energy to really focus on what people are saying to you, without switching off. But the effort to listen to somebody can reap great dividends, because you are communicating to them that, you know what, you are of value, you are worth my attention. 2 Samuel 22:7, I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice in his temple, and my cry entered his ears. I mean, how much does it do for us when we pray, believing that God not only hears our prayers, but also is willing to answer? So listening is a skill. And in listening, maintain good eye contact, give undivided attention, don't interrupt, show interest, keep an open mind, be aware of non-verbal behavior, don't give advice unless requested, and listen a little longer. You know, those last two can be difficult to put into practice, because when we hear people talk about their problems, it's natural for us to want to jump in and tell them what they should be doing. But important just to give them time to tell their story. That in and of itself is therapeutic, the act of telling the story. And then listening a little longer. I was taught that, you know, when you're counseling, listen, and then when you finish listening, listen some more, and then when you finish listening some more, listen some more, until you are satisfied that, or the person is satisfied that they've been heard. One of the tools, and we will be dealing with conflict resolution in our next session, but one of the tools in helping couples to communicate with each other is the speaker-listener technique. But what research has shown is that interventions or tools like the speaker-listener technique are fine when you're dealing with moderate communication difficulties. But in conflict situations where there is emotional hijacking, it's not so effective, because the people are not in a place where they are able to put the brakes on their emotions and say, okay, let's get out the speaker listener card and go through these techniques. So it's important to appreciate that we need to cultivate good emotional regulation in order to have effective communication. Again, here's what research indicates about communication, that 55% of what we communicate is through our body language, 7% through our words, 38% through tone of voice. And that's a big proportion, 55%. You know, but if we think about it, we can see how that might be. If you know, I listened to a sermon not so long ago, and then afterwards, after the sermon finished, the deacon got up and he said, and we thank the speaker for that inspiring message. It was like, really? He was speaking words, but his body language was saying something completely different. In counseling situations, you might have somebody saying, I don't care what so and so thinks, and while they're saying that, they're getting red in the face, and the tears are flowing, and the body language is not congruent with the words that they're speaking, and you can kind of challenge them on that. So body language is important to recognize. So learning to read and understand body language may be the most important skill in effective communication. I remember when I was preparing a presentation, and my son at that time, he must have been about 4, 5, and I showed him this picture of this baby, and I asked him, well, what is that baby feeling? And he took a guess, and then he quickly corrected himself and said, no, boredom. Yeah, okay. It's important to learn how to read people's body language to understand what they are actually communicating. Empathy is the foundation of emotional connection and understanding. The Native Americans have this saying, do not judge a man until you have walked 2 moons in his moccasins, which means step into his world. Look at things from the other person's perspective. Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And that is about getting alongside people and experiencing their emotions with them. Neuroscience has shown that there are neurons in the brain called mirror neurons, which mirror what people are experiencing. So when people are crying, empathy, an empathetic response may tug at our heartstrings as well. When people are laughing, that may stimulate other people to laugh too. We have these mirror emotions in our brain that help us to be empathetic. So people with low emotional intelligence tend to be managed by their emotions. But emotionally intelligent people can recognize their emotions. They can label what it is that they are experiencing. Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it sadness? Is it happiness? What is it? But then you are able to manage your feelings. You're able to regulate your feelings. Then in terms of our relationships with other people, we are sensitive to other people's emotions. And as a result, we can manage our relationships effectively. This is vital. In terms of healthy relationships, you cannot have a healthy relationship without developing good emotional intelligence. It is a prerequisite. How do we use our emotions? One, again, identify the emotions that you are experiencing. And experience and research has shown that women tend to be more able to identify and express their emotions than men tend to. But it's not the men can't. Women tend to find that easier to do. Which is why women tend to be the regulators of communication within a relationship. Women tend to be more willing to raise difficult issues within a relationship. Work out what the emotion is giving you. Why am I experiencing this emotion? What is underpinning it? And then ask yourself, how can I use the emotion? Um, the word emotion contains the word motion. Our emotions are designed to move us in a particular direction. So how can I use this emotion in a constructive way? Then identify what you need to change. So do I need to change my perspective? Do I need to change my behavior? What do I need to change? Do I need to change my circumstance? What? And then once you've decided all of that, take action to change your life. So we can do this with any emotion that we experience so that we can utilize that emotion in a positive way to enhance our relationships. So empathetic listeners use their eyes to notice others' emotions. They use their imagination to see the situation from the other person's perspective. You know, if I was in their situation, how would I feel? They use their words to reflect back what they hear. And this is an excellent way to clarify that you have understood what has been said. And they use their hearts to feel what the other person is feeling. In effective communication, it's important to listen not only to the words, but listen to the heart for unspoken fears, concerns, moods, and aspirations. So people may not be particularly effective in choosing the right words to communicate what is actually going on in their hearts. They may not even understand what it is that is motivating the words that they are speaking. So somebody who says, "You're never around for me," might actually be saying, "I miss you." You're not listening to me. I'd really appreciate it if you listen to me. You are so careless with money. I want us to save more. You don't care about me. I'm feeling neglected. So they're saying, addressing the same issue, but they're coming at it with different words, and the words that we express can have different impacts on the person that we are speaking to. So it is a skill to learn how to choose the right words to express what we are expressing, we want to express, in a way that accomplishes what we want to accomplish rather than antagonizing a situation. Faithfully telling our story and listening to the stories of others is one of the single most important things that we can do. Somebody said that we are story. We are the product of every experience that we have ever had in our lives. Psalm 78. And this is talking about the children of Israel sharing their testimonies. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. One of the most effective ways to communicate faith is through the sharing of stories. And God tells Israel to do that time and time again with their children. So we mentioned in a trust relationship needs to be characterized by accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. And these ARE conversations are the foundation of understanding one another and building relationships. 1 Peter 3 verse 7, husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife. So healthy relationships require that we, again, seek to understand before being understood. Neuroscience again. Brain research shows that the sharing of personal stories builds empathy through what's called brain synchronicity. So when I share my personal testimony with another individual, the area of the brain that lights up when I share also lines up in the brain of the other person. So there is actually physical activity that is going on between brains in order to build connection, contact. Exodus 12, and it shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. So God is saying to the children of Israel, look, create these monuments. And the purpose of the monuments is to stimulate questions. And when the question is asked by your children, you share your testimony. So the sharing of story is so important in the counseling context, in the friendship context, even in the work context. Sharing our story is simply sharing with others what is going on within our hearts. The way we choose to communicate is an accurate barometer of our characters. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. What's on the inside, again, will come out on the outside. When people speak, they always reveal something about their deepest thoughts, ambitions, and concerns, even when they don't intend to. Matthew 12:34, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Summing up, communication that permits a sharing of inner feelings and self-disclosure is essential for healthy relationships. Many typical ways of talking to others in reality send hidden messages that weaken, sorry, the typo there, that weaken another's sense of worth and effectively shut down communication. And this again speaks to integrity, sincerity, that Palmer Parker's comment that if you are here unfaithfully with us, you are causing terrible damage. What is on the outside will come out on the inside. And finally, channels of communication can be kept clear and open by learning skills of deep listening and deep sharing. So as family ministry leaders, one of the things that we can do through seminars or small group meetings is to teach good communication skills and help people to practice those skills. Okay, thank you very much. You've been very attentive. We are done for this session.